So I think this is exactly one of the things that founders maybe should be thinking about a little bit more, strategizing on more. It's wise for early stage founders to begin evaluating the people that they want to have on their board early. And working with an advisory board is a good way to do that. You know, you can kind of get a sense of how people work, where their governance focus is. Do they share the vision of the organization? It's very important to actually have a board in place before you think about accepting external capital. The chances are really good that your VC is going to ask for a board seat, especially if the ticket size is really large. And you want to make sure that you have a board already established that has a good governance process, good documentation. Then that all is going to just going to give your investors much more confidence in your ability to lead too. Playing small does not serve the world. If you have a great idea and you have the energy and drive to pursue it, then you should at least try to get it out there.
Welcome to the BioTalk Unzipped podcast, where we unzip the stories behind medical progress by sharing the latest and greatest advances in biopharmaceuticals and medical technologies in a fun, entertaining, and enlightening format. And now your co-hosts, Gregory Austin and Dr. Chad Briscoe. Hello and welcome to BioTalk Unzipped, where it's our mission to unzip, unlock, and uncover the stories behind medical progress. I'm your host, Gregory Austin. I'm a life science professional in bioanalysis from Kansas City. Along with me is Chad Briscoe. He's a senior bioanalytical leader from North Carolina. And here at BioTalk Unzipped, we bring experts from different corners of the pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device worlds to share their innovations, insights, career journeys, and personal stories to the show. Please subscribe and thank you for listening. Today on BioTalk Unzipped, we are joined by a woman who spent over 25 years not just advancing the science of drug development, but even challenging the systems that decide which innovations get to see the light of day. Katrina Rogers is a seasoned scientist, leadership expert, and force of equity in life sciences. From her early days at Pfizer running ADME and metabolism studies to senior roles in contract manufacturing to becoming the founding CEO of Evergreen Bioscience Innovation, she's built a career at the intersection of breakthrough science and operational excellence and strategic change. She's also the founder of Katrina Rogers Consulting, where she helps underrepresented founders and life science investors bring drugs, devices, and diagnostics to market, not just faster, but smarter. On top of that, she's an adjunct faculty member at Washington State University and a fierce advocate for biotech workforce development. Katrina's mission is bold and simple. The world needs your big idea. And today we're going to unzip the story behind her big idea and how she's helping others bring theirs to life. Hi, Katrina. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Gregory. Hi, Chad. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure. Thanks for being here. So, Katrina, it's our tradition for us at BioTalk to make a $100 donation to the charity of your choice. And you asked for us to donate that to the local Spokane Food Bank, which we were thrilled to do. And just a real quick moment, why is that particular charity important to you?
Well, I have benefited for many years from having a very stable family life, having a very stable economic situation. But I know that's not true for many folks in our community. And I think that by supporting our local food bank, that's one way that I can make sure that I'm giving back and building the community that I think I want to live in.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that. And we'll also put a link to that organization into the show notes if anyone feels inspired to also contribute.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
So, Katrina, you spent over 25 years in life sciences, from ADME to in Pfizer, and founding your innovation clusters and advising founders. What moment or role most radically kind of shaped how you see the biotech industry today?
I have a number of moments that I think were very compelling, but the one I think that really stands out for me was when I worked with a contract research organization known as MDS Pharma Services. And in that role, I was technical director for pharmacology and metabolism. And I got a chance to really see how our industry manages the process of discovery and development. So a significant amount of the work that we do within discovery and with the early discovery and on into development is done by contract organizations, whether they're CROs, contract research organization, or contract manufacturing organizations. I mean, there's a number of other players that work in that space, but just a really significant fraction of the work is done outside of the actual pharma company. And I've met and worked with a number of companies that are essentially virtual, 3 or 4 people in an office or possibly in their home offices working together with these contract organizations to actually bring therapeutics and medical devices to market.
Excellent. And, leaving that stable scientific, leadership career, you went to launch your own consultancy, which is a bold move. What finally kind of pushed you to start your own firm in 2017, and what maybe fears or doubts did you have to overcome to make it a reality?
Right. Well, I had started a new role in quality in 2010, and it's quite typical for any of us to find that after 3 or 4 years, we're ready for a new transition. We've mastered what we were doing at that point. We may be really top performers in that role, but we're ready for a new challenge. I tried on several roles, but none of them were a really good fit. And then I realized that I was a little frustrated with corporate America, a little frustrated with watching other people not mismanage the value of an organization, and recognizing that the only way that I was going to be able to address that was to just go out on my own. So that's what made me start my professional services firm.
Oh, that's excellent. I've had in the past my own adventures, I guess, in corporate America, where someone came in, like a new CEO comes in and just wrecks the culture, literally wrecks the company. And then they still walk away with their golden parachute, which can be kind of frustrating, right?
And you're like, and the market rewards them. You're just like, what?
Pay for performance,
I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier this afternoon. It was just a catch up, right? With no particular agenda, just somebody I hadn't connected with in a while. And we were talking about that leadership and organizations, and I was talking about how, at the base of it, if you do take care of the people that are in the organization and you create a job, I always try and think, it's almost like the do unto others as you'd want done to you. Actually, it's exactly like that, right? If you create an environment that they want to be in and give them the career they want, they give a lot back to you. And so that's one of the cores of, I guess, my leadership philosophy is just to create an environment and a job I'd want to work in if I was at that, an analogous stage in my career. So, yeah.
Build trust, and that will engender loyalty.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
When you were at Katrina, you're leading Evergreen Bioscience Innovation, can you share maybe a challenge that came up you didn't expect when you were trying to really get that life science ecosystem going, and how did you navigate that?
Well, the early founding team asked me to be the CEO as I was doing a significant fraction of the organizing for the innovation cluster at that time. I was delighted to take the role. It was an excellent personal and professional challenge for me. One surprise that I found was our board was not as supportive as I anticipated that they would be. And we struggled a little bit more than we probably should have with making decisions, with moving forward. They were uncertain of my leadership, and it was creating a challenge. So I was really delighted to be able to transition successfully and calmly. So move the board over to our executive director, Michelle Armstrong, who's a fantastic colleague. I work with her all the time. I moved to the board position where I still remain. And but that change has been a very powerful, a good transition. And I have been able to support Michelle in the right way and the model what I think was better board governance. So we've made great progress.
So it's interesting because, I think the employees certainly see the CEO and whatever that person is doing with how they're communicating, how they're leading, how they're treating people. And to a certain extent, maybe Wall Street or, the outside world, the CEO is the face of the company. They should be the face of the company. But what we don't see is what's going on behind the scenes, right? So you can have a good leader or a bad leader, but then you have this board, could be a great board that's supportive and they lead you through every step of the way, or could be a very challenging board that has the CEO's feet to the fire. Not saying that happened to you, but that, I mean, I know that has happened to other leaders in the past. And so that's something that we, probably take for granted for those of us who haven't been on a board.
Right.
How, what's your takeaway? And I'm not looking for a specific on your situation, but because that wouldn't be fair to ask you, but kind of generally speaking, what would be the takeaway? Somebody who's moving into a position like that to try to foresee maybe that it's a mismatch, and it can be whether you're joining a board or leading an organization, or maybe you're just taking your first job, to know that there's a fit between the organization and you.
Chad, that's a great conversation. And I think it's something, Gregory, I know you kind of had the thought about talking about what do founders, or what do they struggle with? And so I think this is exactly one of the things that founders maybe should be thinking about a little bit more, strategizing on more. I was talking to Sharon Hrinkow of Life Science Works in Washington, D.C. recently, and she kind of echoed the same thing. It's wise for early stage founders to begin evaluating the people that they want to have on their board early. And working with an advisory board is a good way to do that. You can kind of get a sense of how people work, where their governance focus is. Do they share the vision of the organization? Sort of vet some, you can bring new people on and vet them before you form a board. But I think it's very important to actually have a board in place before you think about accepting external capital. The chances are really good that your VC is going to ask for a board seat, especially if the ticket size is really large. And you want to make sure that you have a board already established that has a good governance process, good documentation. Then that all is going to lead, just going to give your investors much more confidence in your ability to lead too.
Excellent.
And how big? I mean, how big do you need to be? Like let's say somebody's a startup and they're one guy or they're two guys with a great idea. Do they need a board of 4 people to go out and get Series A money, or how does that work?
No, I actually think a small board is best. As small a board as you can keep it. I would say that you'd need to make sure that you understand the roles in the organization, especially if you have a co-founder. All that should be defined and documented really clearly. But a 3-person board, it would work great. So if you had, the chief operating officer, the chief executive officer, and 1 external board member, because then you won't have an echo chamber.
Right.
That just that structure alone will force you into the documentation pieces and all of the other things that you need to make sure that you have a stable organization before you take on any more.
Makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chad, I think it's time for our first session of New News.
New news.
New news.
Nice. In Biospace, article entitled Biotech, a bright spot for female founders amid a DEI pullback. This was published in March 6th. And the basic summary is that despite political headwinds facing the DEI initiatives, female biotech founders have secured $4.3 billion across 121 deals last year, which is an 8.5% share of all the biotech VC funding. And that's a jump up from $3 billion the year before. A new PitchBook report highlights biotech as a rare bright spot for women-led startups, with Boston leading the charge. Surprise, surprise. Still, with the policy changes threatening to limit access, the future does kind of remain uncertain. But this is really, it's nice to hear some positive feedback, that's happening in the marketplace. How exciting is this news amid some of the changes that we've had? And have you encountered any similar stories kind of in your world about success with female founders?
I think it's fantastic news, and I think that I hope that those metrics will continue. They should. We know that female founders are significantly underrepresented in funding. There are a number of reasons potentially why. There are a number of reasons where female founders can address that challenge themselves. But I believe the biotech industry is primed to support more female founders, partly because there's a very significant fraction of the workforce Also, a very significant fraction of the leadership is female. And then the other piece of data that I think is often misunderstood, but should be recognized all the time, is again and again we show that female founders are returning more money on the dollar than their male counterparts. So it's quite typical. The metrics are quite typical. 70 cents on the dollar invested for female founders versus 40 cents on the dollar return for male founders. That's almost twice.
Yeah. So I saw something on LinkedIn today, and I did not see a reference for the number, but it said 3% of the VC money goes to women-led organizations, and that the return is 2.5x. So
I wouldn't be surprised at those numbers either, because they tend to change, but in that area, that 3 to 5%. But then
yeah,
it's very true.
I mean, it's significant. Even I always, when I look at numbers like that, I'm like, okay, it may vary a little bit, but it's significant. Even if those numbers are off by 30 or 40%, they're significant.
Exactly, they're quite significant.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that, and that's hopefully people with money will pay attention to that. Yeah. Look at that as a good bet.
Well, we're seeing an increase in the number of women who have exits, and that's going to impact the investment community too, because people who exit will quite typically, they'll take a short break, but then what do they want to do? They want to continue to build. Startup founders are startup founders. Yes. They don't like stable. They like to start new things, and they often will get into investing.
Yep.
So you mentioned in your comments that there's a reason why women are struggling to have these opportunities, and there's things that they can do. Do you mind expanding on that?
Well, I follow Laura Huang, who is a professor at Northeastern University, and she's done significant research about how investors make choices. She's with colleagues. She has made some excellent research around the kinds of questions that are asked of male founders versus female founders. So, contextually understanding that research and being able and ready to answer, to redirect the questioning in a line that's more constructive for you. She has a book called Edge, which is an excellent read for anyone interested in sort of managing how they're perceived, right? So that, that's to me, the biggest message is you are the architect of how others perceive you. And there's a lot you can do to manage that perception and to redirect that perception. And I think it's important for all of us to make sure that we understand and are directing our own path.
Indeed. Interesting. So from your roots in ADME and DMPK to regulatory filings and market strategy, you've touched nearly every point, right, in that spectrum across the drug development chain. Where do you see some of the most dangerous knowledge gaps between founders and regulators today?
What worries me right now is the potential gap in understanding new biology that regulators are going to face, simply because our administration has made substantial changes to basic research infrastructure, to the NIH, which is quite often how the FDA will understand new science around biological targets, new regulatory science, or new science around the tools and the techniques of drug development, drug delivery. So in a space where the FDA is very interested in using more in vitro tools, moving away from in vivo models as a requirement for new drug applications, losing a lot of the young minds who, maybe were on their 90-day test period or had just been promoted, losing those young minds, that's going to be a problem. And founders don't always realize that the convincing point you have to do for the FDA is show them your science, show them how you can connect the dots between how you manufactured the drug substance, how you then made the drug product, how that drug product works in your models, and both your early stage clinical and then your clinical models. How do you show all of this and make a compelling scientific picture that the product is going to be beneficial in the indications you intend it to be in, and that it will also be safe for patients to use.
So yeah, Katrina, were you that's fantastic, by the way. Actually, I love that comment. But,
hey,
yeah. So
you guys live this every day. So
we do, absolutely. So were you surprised, or what aspect of the announcement from the FDA surprised you with the reduction in the use of the animal models?
That didn't surprise me, because the FDA 2.0 Act that was at the end of 2003, I believe, already, it changed the FD&C Act to direct the FDA to be open to that, to be open to changing their paradigm. Big step forward, tiny, it's like a single sentence in the whole act, in that whole piece of legislation, which is pretty large. And I can tell you, I looked through the whole piece of legislation to make sure that I knew what it was.
Impressive.
So I knew that we all knew this was coming. And there was even talk at the end of 2024 to build on that, to actually add some more change to the legislation. So what's been really surprising is, I'm going to say it, the direct attack on our basic science infrastructure.
Yes.
I think that I think the general public is not clearly aware of what role basic science plays in creating the biology around how we look for targets for new therapeutics, and also creating the basic understanding of properties of things that allow us to create new diagnostics or new medical device tools. All of these things work together. We need basic research handles new materials. Basic research handles what things are toxic. Basic research does all of these kinds of things for us. And by undercutting that, we're shortchanging our capacity to be innovative for, I expect, decades to come.
And industry-directed research is not going to fill that void. I haven't even heard anyone suggest that it might, because it's just a different. It's just a different driver. It's just not.
It's a different driver, and all pharma, large to small, look for their targets from universities. It is a well-known fact that more than 60% of new therapies, new drugs, and biologics are coming out. They're not coming out of big pharma. They're coming out of small academic and virtual shops.
But and you said it, the mechanisms are based on the biology that's learned in the basic research, which is funded by the NIH or conducted at the NIH as well. And
then you build on it with the SBIR and STTR, the non-dilutive funding in tranches and phases to de-risk the mechanism. And I'm going to tell you that right now, venture capital is not filling that role. I've heard people say, don't worry, independent private capital will come in and solve this problem. Well, private capital is saying, hey, the NDA is not a fundable milestone. Your fundable milestone is your first clinical trial. And I'm like, if you don't have any money for it, that's an expensive proposition.
And the NDA is way downstream from where this all needs to start.
And I've gotten to know some of the fine people who work at the NIH, or at least worked at the NIH, don't know what their situation is today. And they believe in their mission. I mean, they are bought into what they're doing, so committed to helping people. For some, this is it's their only chance, their last chance to try and get better or extend life by going to the clinic there in Building 10. And they're not making the kind of money in industry either. I mean, they're really passionate about what they're trying to do, and it's a great opportunity to make a difference and advance the science from that perspective. And I hope that will change. It kind of takes me back, Chad, to our first episode, you and I were just talking.
Right.
And one of the things that we were mentioning, this was kind of coming off the heels of COVID and so forth, was that, science is not a conspiracy theory. And
yeah,
we shouldn't treat it as such.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very true.
Yeah.
Just quick, I think a quick correction here, Chad. I think you mentioned NDA and maybe I misspoke. It's the IND that is not.
IND,
Yeah,
okay.
you.
It is
Yes.
the IND that is not the fundable milestone. I know you're like, what? What is she saying?
No, I went right to IND. I knew what you were referring to, and my brain went right to IND. So, yep. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
And you mentioned something, Katrina, that is, I think it's another quotable for our show, is show them your science.
Yeah.
Referring founders to regulators.
Yeah.
That's what they want to see. And they want to see it. They don't want to see it from you. They want to see it from your key opinion leaders. They want to see it they want you to show cited research from around, the people who are independent of your organization, who are working in that same field. So we often hear this, and this is coaching that we often give to people who are out there pitching, is you need to understand everyone who's working in your space. Whether or not they're a direct competitor of yours, but you should really understand what's happening in the science in your space.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And I've spent some time in the medical device world, and the model is kind of flipped from founders and regulators, right? As I'm sure you've experienced, where you've got these founders who have a great idea for a product or medical device or concept, and they hire the engineers and they build it, and it's really cool. And they're like, we got to get this thing to market. We got to go now. And they're just trying to get it there. And the regulators, their internal people are saying, no, there's some steps we have to follow, that we have to prove some, if it's a 510K, you don't have to go through the whole clinical process, but you still have to show some things to the regulators that they need to know. And they're like, what do you mean? We just got to put it out there. We'll deal with that stuff later.
Well, you won't get any funding if you're going to use the direct to consumer route.
Right.
And it's risky to do the direct to consumer route if you think that you should actually be getting clearance, a 510K or some other kind of regulatory clearance. You're right. It's a little flipped. Founders there often struggle. So when you're thinking about biologics and drugs, the path to market is a lot more structured. The steps that you have to go through, everybody has to go through the same steps. So that's not a mystery. With devices, the steps could be in different orders. They're a little bit different. There's some basic principles that you follow, but you're smart to do things like use the agency's Q-Sub program in order to understand and, pin down your regulatory pathway, get their feedback and, make sure you know what they want before you go after it. But I find one of the things that most founders struggle with, don't do enough of, is understanding their customers, understanding go to market, and are they actually building a product that is sellable, that has a market.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you can spend an awful lot of money in time in R&D, and then nobody's buying.
Nobody's buying, or they see what you've done and then they find a cheaper way to do it, or they divert. They'll try it once and then like, oh well, there's an easier pathway.
Yeah.
And it's like, how are people already? If you don't know how people are already solving the problem, then there's no way you can innovate around that to make sure that whatever your solution is so compelling that everybody has to change over to it.
Right.
Have you had the experience maybe where somebody has a product like that you had to say, I wish you the best luck, but I'm not sure, or have you thought about this? I'm sure have you thought about this moment with people?
Well, and you often see this with early stage academic startups, the folks in the tech transfer, working with the tech transfer office. They're not comfortable talking. They're not necessarily comfortable going out to the customer base, yet they really need to. But the ones who really shine, they have found one of their students who is excited about the prospect and really wants to be an entrepreneur, and they just crush it. Yeah. So it's those companies that are like, oh, you've got some legs under you. This could actually happen.
Yeah.
Nice.
And is there a rule of thumb for how long that scientific inventor should stay the leader of the company before they should find a CEO? Because that seems to be another big mistake that happens.
It is. That can be a significant mistake. So it kind of depends on the person.
Mm-hmm.
So a good founder, they're the chief doer. They, the somebody who is just driving, always doing things. They hold the vision, and they're the chief people officer.
Yeah.
So if you're not already good, or at least competent at all three of those things, you're probably not a good choice to be the CEO anyways. You probably should say, all right, I need a co-founder who can do those things.
Right.
And I'll just stay with the technical role.
Right.
But I'm often talking to people and saying, look, let's get back to what the real vision is. Is the vision for this company self-aggrandizement? I don't often use that term, but is this vision of the company, is it about you? Is it about, is it really about you? And if that's so, well, then just be aware that you're not going to get anywhere with that.
Yeah.
And our recommendation is, and I've seen this happen at, companies relatively late stage, where investors come in and say, we don't think the CEO is the right person that capable of doing the execution for this later stage. We want you to change. And the CEO saying, nope, don't want to do it. It's like, no, you're not investable otherwise. Yeah. So it's a real conversation. It happens all the time. And I'm sorry to say that I often find that the founder sometimes can't get out of their own way. Quite often can't get out of their own way.
For sure. Yeah.
That was another thing we talked about, wasn't it, Chad? Very beginning is that was the most surprising thing to you, is like the amazing amount of really bad decisions people make when it seems pretty clear the right path towards success or getting to the next milestone is going this way, and then they just take a sharp left.
Yeah, it is interesting to try and think inside people's heads when they're making those decisions too, because they've got something going on there, right? But I think it would be a special skill, and it's probably something, Katrina, that you've honed to an extent with your consultant. But to have that skill to be able to see, why is that person going left when right is the obvious path for everyone else, right? I mean, everybody sees that they should be going right, and they're still going left. Yeah. You got to figure out how to get in their mind and understand that, right?
I do a lot of that. That's my primary role in my advisory firm, is as a problem solver.
Okay.
And a lot of times I'll just go back to the basic quality tools. You can root cause analysis, 5 whys, all of these things, very super powerful ways to just gently dig into where the problem is.
Actually, that's actually it's a great thought that I think a lot of us could apply, because I think if you were to just say, hey, let's just go one step before that fork in the road, right, and analyze using some of these tools of where we need to go. And then maybe everybody as a team ends up going right, or heck, sometimes these founders are geniuses that see things in a way nobody else sees. And you find out left is the right way after all, right? People probably thought Steve Jobs was nuts when he wanted to make the iPhone, and many other things, So, I think guys like that do go left a lot, and they are right, and a lot of people they are correct, and everybody else is wrong. So that's right. But that would be an interesting role that you have to serve, trying to help people problem solve those things. So.
You almost have to be a psychotherapist as well, because there could be something funny going on.
Holding
there,
hands, right? Like, okay, something I do often say to people is, okay, before you're ready to jump off the roof, come and talk to me. We just take a breath, we'll step back.
Yeah. That sounds exactly like a psychotherapist.
Wait, we've all been there, right? Yeah. You wake up in the morning, it's like, oh no, it's all me. Yeah,
for sure.
Indeed. Is there any other, is that like the most common mistake, is someone's maybe not the right fit to be the best leader? Or is there one or other mistakes that you see early stage entrepreneurs make?
The most common mistake is not doing enough discovery research, customer discovery work. You should be just out there constantly talking. You should really just start to get an understanding of the market, who your potential competitors, who your actual competitors are, how does the process work? This is a case where if you're doing the right research, you're building the network that you need, so that, again, you should be using your LinkedIn to connect with people and ask them these questions. You say, I'm working on this and I have a question about this. could I send you an email so we can converse by email? No, your time is precious. Or could we take a 15-minute call so you could answer this question for me? People are incredibly generous with their time if you are being super specific about what it is you need.
Yeah.
Nice. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then while you're building that network, you're meeting new people. You can say, who's the best person working in my field? Do you know of any investors? Would you care to introduce me? Just getting those connections out there and just saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. If you're interested in knowing more, happy to keep you on happy to put you on our newsletter list.
So Katrina, do you work mostly with folks that are in the kind of local Washington, Spokane area? Do you cover kind of Washington, or do you end up branching out across the whole country with some of the support?
I have clients who are local. I have clients who are national, and I have some who are international.
Okay.
So it's a mix. They come to me by referral. So, I have other people who say, you've got a problem here. You not just need to work with someone like Katrina, you need to work with Katrina.
What was the TV show? Was it called The Fixer or
You might say MacGyver, but I don't put things together in that kind of way.
No, I think there was a show called The Fixer, but I don't think you fix things in the way they did either. Fewer guns and karate chops.
Right. Sometimes being a problem solver means my job is to deliver unhappy news.
Yeah.
Right. Or to uncover unhappy news. And, companies get stuck often because they have leadership challenges, or, there's a dynamic that's not working and people are not paying attention to, they know what the reality is, but they just don't want to look at it. And sometimes the right choice is to close.
That's tough. Yeah. So it's time once again for new news.
New news.
New news.
In Tech Target article entitled Trump Signals Shift in Drug Imports Tariff Policy. So as we know, he is planning to impose tariffs on pharmaceutical imports, major shift that could drive up U.S. drug prices and disrupt global supply chains as well. Experts warn that while the goal is to bring the manufacturing back home, most U.S. medicines depend on ingredients and APIs and finished products from overseas. And analysts predict that the proposed tariffs could raise prescription drug costs by $600 per household per year and worsen the existing shortages that we have today. Is it really going to deliver the real gains? And that's the concern. So with over 70% of the active ingredients coming from overseas, analysts also say the cost of reshoring could cost a company up to $2 billion per facility, and take years, of course, to get it here and to see that, that return. What is your take on this? How do we make sense of this situation, and what are some of the best ways we might think about responding?
Well, I'm going to tell you that I think tariffs are an incredibly blunt economic instrument. I don't see them being used in a very strategic way right now. So, will they work? Unlikely. They might work if there was more thought being put into them. But I think one of the things you talked about there was the kinds of things that are imported. So what people don't recognize is there is actually a significant capacity for finished drug product here in the United States. And that has increased over the last 5 years. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we estimated that there was about 1 million vial per year capacity for sterile therapeutics, sterile small volume parenterals globally. We needed 10 billion vial capacity just to handle the biologics. This is not talking about vaccines. This is not talking about any of the things that, that people are being weird about. This is about, your autoimmune disease biologics and all of the things that are coming through. And all the injectables that we're talking about, the GLP-1 inhibitors and all of those things. Well, that's a big gap. And it's not surprising that companies were like, hey, there's a big gap. Let's build new plants. So I do know that quite a significant number of new sterile injectable plants have been built. I think that there has been some remodeling of oral dose plants because we have to have a different set of equipment. But this is all capital intensive construction and takes a lot of years of planning. And by the way, it also usually takes equipment from international companies. We don't actually make most of that equipment. So we do make some of that equipment here in the United States, and people should use that more, but we don't make all of it. So quite a bit of it has to be shipped in from someplace else. So in terms of finished dose product, I actually think that there's less there's some being, I think a lot of the oral tablets are being imported. I think from a dose product perspective, sterile injectables is still probably mostly domestic.
Okay.
Drug substance, the active ingredients, quite a bit of that's being manufactured internationally. Why? Because it's less expensive. Again, we're failing to think about how does a whole market economy work when we think about tariffs. I mean, drug companies themselves went overseas to get these actives made because they were less expensive. They could get the same quality in a less expensive format. So that's, if the tariffs are being applied to drug product, drug substance, raw materials, a significant fraction of USP grade and raw materials are coming from overseas as well. So all of that has to get imported. If there's a tariff, it gets slowed in customs. You don't have the supply. You can't manufacture. So there goes your production schedule. An average sterile fill finish plant, it's $1 million a day if they're not making any money. If they're not making any product at all, it costs them $1 million a day. Wow. I'm like, what did we talk about at the beginning of this? People flushing value down the toilet.
Yeah.
Wow.
A little frustrating right now, folks.
We're gonna be asking all of our companies and our taxpayers to be flushing money down the toilet. I think that's like you said, the tariffs are a blunt instrument, and the blunt instrument's being used in a blunt way. So that's it
is, and in my opinion, and probably not only my opinion, but we're treading on morally questionable ground if we're talking about medicines that people need to survive or to at least have a reasonable quality of life. And is it fair to them to impose this type of thing? And I'm curious because I don't know enough about division of powers in this situation. Do the courts have any ability to say, okay, we're going to draw the line on this. You can do these other things, but we're going to step in and not allow this pharmaceutical
like to make accessibility to medicines and things like that?
Right.
It's a good question. Yeah. I think the courts rule on what laws Congress has made. And so, I think that Congress has a significant amount of power that they have unfortunately been unwilling to use right now. And I am disappointed. Yeah. I expect leadership from everybody, but more importantly, people who are in leadership roles.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of leadership, your LinkedIn tagline is "The world needs your big idea." Which is a very powerful statement. And this is what I guess gets people to lead their own company, to come up with ideas, to venture out and do something incredible. Where does that conviction come from for you personally?
Well, it comes from a quote by Marianne Williamson, who's an author. And she said, we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. Right. If you have a great idea and you have the energy and drive to pursue it, then you should at least try to get it out there. And maybe after exploring it a little bit, you'll decide you want to go in a different direction. You'll want to take your idea in a different way. But that does not make the idea bad.
Right. Anybody can have a great idea. It doesn't have to be, right? Someone who's studied for 8 years in, postgraduate to get there. So I think that's really powerful. And people should not underestimate their own power and their own ability to make a mark on this world in a good way.
Yeah. People who understand the problem best will often have very good ideas about how it could be solved. If they can meet the people with the energy to create the solution, then they're unstoppable. We proved this in World War II with the beginning of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and we have continued to prove it ever since. You put the visionary people together with the people who are working on the shop floor, and they're unstoppable.
Nice. And having mentored so many women and underrepresented founders, what emotional or systemic barriers do you think still hold back brilliant ideas from reaching the market? And what's the one practical thing that leaders can do to change that?
I think our culture is one of the systemic barriers that often gets in most of our way. And this is true for founders of any gender, of any heritage. We will often put limiters on ourselves. We will often deprecate ourselves. We will often say, I am not enough. And, when that small voice is saying that to you, that's the time to be, that's the time to be frank. That's the time to just be like, that's a small voice. That's just one opinion. That's just your opinion in your own brain.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get that idea out in front of a couple of other people and see what's really real.
Right. Yeah. I think in general, we're pretty hard on ourselves. And
our culture is very hard on it. Our culture has expectations for men, for women, for kids. What's your role? Oh, if you're over 50, you're too old to be an innovator, or you're too old to go back and get a PhD. I'm like, what is that? You're not too old to learn.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the way we have it set up is really weird. Who wants to go back to working for less than minimum wage for hours on end in a research lab?
Right.
Unless you really want to do it. You're much better off if you've got your own independent money source and you just go and volunteer for the research lab. Then you can go home at a reasonable hour and say, oh, I'm done. I'm just a volunteer.
Yeah. It's a good idea. So Katrina, if the 25-year-old version of you working in drug metabolism at Pfizer could see you now, what would she be proud of and what would she warn you about?
So if what I would warn her about, or what is that?
Yeah, well,
it's
like warning yourself. If you go back in time, right?
The 25-year-old me would warn me about.
Watch out for the gray hairs, Katrina.
It's a little flip there. Yeah. So what I would tell that 25-year-old me is write more. At Pfizer, I had an opportunity to do some writing for internal publication. I did I had done a few articles. They were really well received. I think if I had followed up on that, if I had continued to write, I would be farther ahead than I am right now in terms of both my thought leadership and my capacity to just put out content. The other thing that I think the 25-year-old me thought was, that others would see my value sooner. And I think this gets back to I mentioned Laura Wong and her book Edge earlier. So this was one of the things that one of her mentors taught her, was that you actually have to drive that vision. You can't just sit back and let other people drive that vision. So I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't step forward. I didn't take leadership roles until later. And I would have served myself and my community and the scientific community better if I had just stepped forward sooner. And I knew how to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is very natural for me. What I do now, I love it, and it's easy, and people enjoy me. So it's I'm not seen as a big jerk or somebody who's super annoying. So
yeah, I agree.
Very good. Yeah. Let's say, Katrina, that the FDA calls you and says, we want Katrina Rogers to design the innovation pathway of the future. What's one radical change you'd propose to better align the science, speed, and public trust?
I think an easy way to move forward, especially with medical devices, is for the FDA to continue their journey to align with ISO standardization on a global basis. So they've done an excellent job of aligning therapeutics and biologics to the ICH standards. There's a similar organization that works globally around med devices, and their framework really focuses on, the ISO standards for devices, for laboratory science, for a bunch of those different things.
Sure.
It makes it easier for people in different markets to start thinking about how can a medical device or a diagnostic be in different markets. If it's a super valuable device someplace in Europe, it's likely to have some significant impact here in the United States. How do you enter the US market? What are those kinds of things? I think the FDA alone could work on that, and that would be straightforward. If they have an opportunity to work at a higher level, there is significant work that could be done to straighten out and align coding to make Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services coding focus less on illness care, or at least include more of the actual health care as opposed to illness care. So kind of right sizing that and making it so that there is a benefit for people and for insurance companies and health systems to invest in taking care of people's health and making sure people stay healthy.
So when you're referring to those 10,000 plus medical diagnostic codes?
Yeah.
No, it's insane. Yeah. My wife
looking at that framework, looking at the way that lab developed tests are operated.
Right.
We've seen over the last 10 years, we've seen some kind of sketchy things happen there. And it's like, right. There was way better ways that could happen.
Yeah, the medical coding system, in my opinion, is out of hand. My wife is studying to be a medical coder, and the book, just with all the codes, is massive. It's huge, and it's not terribly intuitive either in terms of, where you think that, an oncology diagnostic code would be here, and it's actually, 100 pages sooner in another category. Right. And
there might be 5 or 6 codes you could use.
Yeah.
And depending on the code you use, the clinic could get reimbursement, could get partial reimbursement, could not get reimbursement. And it's like, the other thing about it is people have thought, we can train AI on data from hospitals and the EMR data. And look, the EMR data is loaded with these codes, which they don't make sense to anybody. And so if you're training on the codes, what you end up training is making decisions based on what somebody has coded it, not what it actually was. Yeah. So there was a few years back, there was a diagnostic tool that was designed to identify sepsis early in patients, and it had been trained on this EMR data. Yeah. And some independent researchers, after the system had been implemented in a couple of large hospital systems, some independent researchers came through, looked at the data and looked at how it was sorting things, and discovered that the algorithm was actually just identifying people who had been coded as sepsis, not people who actually had sepsis. So it's
so overly complicated. And
it is. It is.
It's built to have mistakes almost. I mean, I don't know how you don't deal with hundreds of those, if not thousands, at a hospital on a daily basis.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Well, before I get to our final question, I wanted to check in with Chad to see if you had anything that you wanted to ask Katrina before we go there.
I appreciate the wealth of information that you have and that you are, Katrina. I think this has been fantastic so far. Just all the different topics you touched on. So I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Like so many of these conversations we have, I go, well, we've been at this almost an hour. We could talk for another 3 hours, I think. And I look forward when we have the opportunity to do that as well.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. We have a tradition here at BioTalk Unzipped where the guest before you will jot down a question, not knowing who's coming next, just something that they want to know about. And I thought this was a really cool question from our last guest. And the question is, where will the next Katrina Rogers come from? And how does the industry train the next Katrina Rogers?
I am convinced that the next person like me will come from the skilled technical workforce. And what do I mean by that? I mean that will be people who they have a high school degree. They may have a 2-year degree. They have not yet achieved their bachelor's degree. 50% of the biotechnology workforce is skilled technical workforce or below. There's a significant fraction that is essentially unskilled technical workforce. But I feel like the industry that we work in, there is no such thing as unskilled or low skilled workforce, because even the people who are the custodians in the facilities have to follow the SOPs. They have to know what they're doing. They have to understand the safety regulations. They're essentially a form of skilled technical workforce.
Yeah.
And I think it's, though, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's the people who are there with the problems. You partner them up with, you get them energized around a problem, then they can run with it. They're smart. People are smart. Everybody has a human machine interface these days, right? Don't tell me you can't operate a human machine interface.
Yeah.
Gone are the days when we just, well, maybe not for some of us, but gone are the days when we had to guess at the buttons on our microwave. No, we kind of have that figured out.
Yeah.
This is true.
So I think you give people some tools. You give them access to other smart people. You give them access to checklists and ways and processes and pathways that it works. That anyone can be an innovator and anyone can drive some of this. And I see it. The rare disease space is a great example for this. So what happens when a child is diagnosed with a rare disease? The parents, the dad is usually super pissed off. He's pissed off at everybody, pissed off at the world. Why does his child have this rare disease? The mom, she's going to solve the problem. And I have met so many moms, and then they rope the dad into it too. And I said, met so many moms and dads who have decided that they are going to solve this problem for their child and for others, children like them. And they're out there raising money. They're out there finding researchers. They contract with contract research organizations and get these studies done. I know people who've just driven it themselves all the way. They're into clinical trials with the therapy. And these are valuable and viable therapies that will help thousands of people.
Yeah.
But it's the passion of one person that is really driving it.
No, that's absolutely true. And it's terrible that it has to start from there, but it's got to start from somewhere. And there's no other stronger driving force than a parent who wants to make their kid well.
That is so true. That is so true.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Katrina, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show, to meet you almost in person, feel like we're in person, and get to know about your journey and your passions and how you're making a difference in the industry and in the world. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, you're welcome, Gregory and Chad. It's been a blast to chat with you. A great way to wrap up a Friday afternoon for me.
Absolutely. I agree.
Time for some beer.
That's right.
That was in my mind. You know me well enough. Yeah.
I still have a couple hours of work to do, so.
Yeah, you're West Coast, so we got you beat.
Yep.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Good deal.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. You're more than welcome.